So this is the psychology of Prince Andrew. This was a
Just as the United
JCS.
Kingdom's unwritten constitution has evolved over the centuries, so has the role of the British monarchy. At present, different people are likely to see the purpose of the royal family in different ways. Many say its duty is to prevent the corruption of government and to remind elected politicians that a higher sovereign is always watching.
Monarchy.
Others say it simply makes financial sense, viewing its role as the British version of Disney World and asserting that it brings in more money than it costs the British taxpayer each year. Some, however, believe that it has no purpose, only the ridiculous notion of outdated traditions and class entitlement, and that the revenue from tourists is simply a myth, presenting the statistic that Chester Zoo has more visitors each year than Windsor Castle. But whatever your views on the royal family are as a whole, it's always a good idea not to generalize, as each individual has their own moral compass and personal character. An example of the more virtuous side of the spectrum could be the two central princes. Prince William does a considerable amount of work for charity, which includes helping impoverished children in underdeveloped countries, while Prince Harry volunteered to fight for his country and served 2 tours of duty on the front line in Afghanistan, not to mention the meaningful significance of his matrimony in 2018, demonstrating to the world how far humanity has come, as the first person of black descent was welcomed into the royal family. The progressive symbolism of the royal wedding was truly remarkable, especially when you consider that interracial marriage was illegal in the United States no longer than 52 years ago. Yet where there is prosperity and promise, corruption and
1960s.
controversy are never afar, and we need to look no further than a single week to find a prime example. Many are already familiar with the current circumstances, but for those of you who aren't, here's a quick rundown. On the 8th of July 2019, 66-year-old hedge fund manager Jeffrey Epstein was arrested on charges of sex trafficking and child sex abuse. The story exploded into the worldwide media, mainly due to his high-profile social circle, which included Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and Queen Elizabeth's son, Prince Andrew. But one of the more bewildering facts of the whole situation,
Prince Andrew
and
is
something
the
most
king.
were unaware of, is that Epstein had
not the
already
king.
been convicted as a sex offender for over
Prince
10
Charles.
years.
Could you please give us your name?
Jeffrey Epstein.
Is it true, sir, that you have what's been described as an egg-shaped penis? One witness described
Okay.
your penis as oval-shaped and claimed when erect it was thick towards the bottom but was thin and small towards the head portion and called it egg-shaped. Those are not my words, I apologize. But as Mr. Critton has stated, that this is a...
His original charges were 4 counts of unlawful sex with a minor and 1 count of sexual abuse. But his high-end attorneys managed to whittle it down to just 1 count of procuring a minor for prostitution, and he served just over 1 year in prison. While Trump and Clinton allegedly cut ties with Epstein after his arrest, Prince Andrew continued the relationship and visited Epstein multiple times at his properties both in the States and also on his private island in the Caribbean, where he allegedly partook in what the media dubbed orgy parties with underage girls who were solicited for sex. One of the alleged victims even went
They wanted to
public,
do something.
stating that she was trafficked and then forced to have sex with Prince Andrew on 3 separate occasions. A photograph
Yes,
of them
mess up.
together surfaced in the media, and many consider it to be substantial evidence to back up the allegations. On the 10th of August 2019, Jeffrey Epstein died under extremely suspicious circumstances, with his death
That's
being
suspicious.
officially ruled a suicide. This only added fuel to the fire, and the public scrutiny aimed at Prince Andrew intensified over the following months. Then, on the 16th of November, he made the extraordinary decision to address the allegations in a televised
BBC.
interview.
We've come to Buckingham Palace in highly unusual circumstances. Normally, we'd be discussing your work, your duty. We'll come on to that. But today, you've chosen to speak out for the first time. Why have you decided to talk now?
Because there is no good time to talk about Mr. Epstein and all things associated.
All of this goes back to your friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. How did you first become friends? How did you meet?
Before that, they
Well, I met through his girlfriend back in 1999, who, and I'd known her since she was at university in the UK. And it would be, to some extent, a stretch to say that as it were, we were close friends. I mean, we were friends because of other people.
This is known as defensive communication. He is responding in a defensive manner due to his own self-perceived flaw. The term a close friend is both subjective and ambiguous. Essentially, anyone can label a friend as not being close if they choose to interpret it that way, especially if it facilitates self-preservation. What's more telling is the fact that he felt the need to say it. If he was certain of his own innocence and morality, then he would be more likely to express concern over his own judge of character rather than attempting to downplay the relationship. It's also important to note his lack of conviction when making this statement.
And it would be, to some extent, a stretch to say that as it were, we were close friends. I mean, we were friends because of other people. And I had a lot of opportunity to go to the United States, but I didn't have much time with him. I suppose I saw him once or twice a year, perhaps maybe maximum of 3 times a year.
More defensive communication. He is now trying to downplay his frequency of visits by using the adverb only, as in, I only visited a convicted pedophile 3 times a year, so there's no way I can be guilty. The simple fact is that the frequency of visits are irrelevant. He could have visited once every decade and still committed an untold number of sex crimes against children.
And quite often, if I was in the United States and doing things, and if he wasn't there, he would say, well, why don't you come and use my houses? So I said, that's very kind, thank you very much indeed. But it would be a considerable stretch to say that he was a very, very close friend. But he had the most extraordinary ability to bring extraordinary people together. And that's the bit that I remember, is going to the dinner parties.
Instead of just saying, I remember going to the dinner parties, he was compelled to assert that it was all he remembered, essentially stating that anything else that may have occurred was inconsequential and therefore couldn't have been nefarious.
Where you would meet academics, politicians, people from the United Nations. I mean, it was a cosmopolitan group of what I would describe as US eminence.
Was that his appeal then? Was that what you...
This was a highly expressive and forcible reaction to such a simple question. Imagine if you were in his position, but completely innocent, void of any wrongdoing whatsoever. This would seem like just a normal question, and you would most likely respond in a casual manner. But if you were guilty, your thought process would be constantly focused on the immediate threat of the present moment. And this question could appear more like an accusation, which could be argued was the reason for Andrew's agitated response.
Because you were perceived by the public as being the party prince.
This is a very intriguing moment of the interview. The claim of him being the so-called party prince isn't a damning assertion. Liking to go out and party doesn't make you a bad person, and the claim is completely insignificant compared to the more serious allegations against him. He goes on to claim that the statement is untrue, but closely observe his demeanor and contortions. He becomes far more expressive in this refuting statement compared to the refuting statements made earlier, and the probable reason for this will be revealed in a moment.
Was that something you shared?
I think that's also a bit of a stretch. I don't know why I've collected that title, because I never have really partied.
The question was not incriminating, so it makes little sense as to why he would be so stuttery and spurious in his response. It could be argued that this was an attempt to portray his nonverbal cues while lying. He is essentially saying, look, this is how bad I am at lying, so any slightly less obvious tells at a later stage can be overlooked.
I was single for quite a long time, in the early 80s, but then after I got married I was very happy.
Shaking his head while making an assertive statement, the movement doesn't correlate with the message. Most body language experts would assert that he is lying here, although his heightened state of focus on the more damning elements may have influenced this.
And I've never really felt the need to go and party.
Am I right in thinking you threw a birthday party for Epstein's girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, at Sandringham?
No, it was a shooting weekend.
A shooting weekend?
Just a straightforward shooting weekend.
The expression on his face is as if he's been accused of something, but the interviewer had only asked if he had thrown a party. It's as if the word party has some damnatory connotations to it, hence the worried look, as well as his assertion that it was just a straightforward shooting weekend, whatever that is.
But during these times that he was a guest at Windsor Castle, at Sandringham, the shooting weekend, We now know that he was and had been procuring young girls for sex trafficking.
We now know that. At the time, there was no indication to me or anybody else that that was what he was doing.
The next moment is fascinating. He breaks eye contact immediately after making his statement, arguably because it was a pure fabrication, and he wasn't comfortable with the reporter's gaze.
And certainly,
making up.
when I saw him
Yes, he got
either in the United States,
He starts off a new sentence, giving a justification for the broken eye contact, yet appears to be trying to think up a related statement on the spot. People do this sometimes when they are uncomfortable. They abruptly say the first clause of a sentence as a means to escape an uncomfortable silence, but they then have to think up the next clause directly on the spot. In the next moments, Andrew realizes that the initial clause he thought up fits in perfectly with his next assertion.
well, no, when I saw him in the United States, or when I was staying in his houses in the United States, there was no indication, absolutely no indication.
Let's watch that
yeah.
again.
And certainly, when I saw him either in the United States, well, no, when I saw him in the United States, or when I was staying in his houses in the United States, there was no indication.
He was convicted of
Yep.
soliciting and procuring a minor for prostitution. He was jailed. This was
Yes.
your friend. How
Yes.
did you feel about it?
Well, I ceased contact with him after I was aware that he was under investigation, and that was later on in 2006.
The question is, how do you feel?
And I wasn't in touch with him again until 2010. So I just...
It's a pointing question.
It was one of those things that if somebody's going through that sort of thing, well, I'm terribly sorry, I can't be...
So no
associated.
contact?
No contact.
When he was serving time, there was no
No.
call, no letter, nothing there?
No.
He was released in July. Within months, by December of 2010, you went to stay with him at his New York mansion. Why? Why were you staying with a convicted sex
After knowing,
Right. I have always, ever since this has happened, and since this has become, as it were, public knowledge that I was there, I've questioned myself as to why did I go, what was I doing, and was it the right thing to do?
He has just confirmed
it's
that
a
he only
question.
started questioning his actions to
Before
visit a
going.
sex offender since it became public knowledge, essentially stating that he's only worried about what others think of his actions rather than what he thinks of his actions.
Now, I went there with the sole purpose of saying to him that because he had been convicted, it was inappropriate for us to be seen together. And I had a number of people counsel me in both directions, either to go and see him or not to go and see him. And I took the judgment call that because this was serious, and I felt that doing it over the telephone was the chicken's way of doing it. I had to go and see him and talk to him.
that doesn't make sense.
Much like a breakup after a long-term relationship, telling someone the news face-to-face is a sign of respect. He has essentially just stated that he still held a sex offender in high regard.
And I went to see him, and I was doing a number of other things in New York at the time, and we had an opportunity to go for a walk in the park, and that was the conversation, coincidentally, that was photographed, which was when I said to him, I said, look, because of what has happened, I don't think it is appropriate that we should remain in contact. And by mutual agreement during that walk in the park, we decided that we would part company, and I left, I think it was the next day. And to this day, I never had any contact with him from that day forward.
He didn't leave the next day. He stayed at Epstein's residence for 4 days after. It must have been pretty awkward staying at someone's house for 4 nights after telling them you want nothing to do with them anymore.
What did he say when you told him that you were breaking up the friendship?
He was what I would describe as understanding.
Question.
He didn't go into any great depth in the conversation about what I was doing or what he was doing, except to say that he'd accepted whatever it was, a plea bargain. He'd served his time, and he was carrying on with his life.
stuttering a lot.
See what I mean? And I said, yes, but I'm afraid to say that's as may be. But with all the attendant scrutiny on me, then I don't think it is a wise thing to do.
This is also fascinating because the only person who can refute his statements is now dead, and in Andrew's mind,
Yeah.
he has free rein to come up with any justification he pleases, but he's about to
totally
be caught
dead.
out.
That was December of 2010.
Yep.
He threw a party to celebrate his release, and you were invited as
No,
the
I didn't
guest
go.
of honour.
Oh,
Yeah.
in 2010, there certainly wasn't a party to celebrate his release in December, because it was a small dinner party. There were only 8 or 10 of us, I think, at the dinner.
He once again seems to be very anxious and panicked by the word party. And according to Andrew, having up to 10 people over doesn't classify it as such, making it the more acceptable dinner with a convicted sex offender rather than the deplorable dinner party with a convicted sex offender.
If there was a party, then I'd know nothing about that.
You were invited to that dinner as a guest of honour.
Well, I was there, so there was a dinner. I don't think it was quite as you might put it, but yeah, okay, I was there at a dinner, yeah.
I'm just trying to work this out because you said you went to break up the relationship and yet you stayed at that New York mansion several days. I'm wondering how long...
But I was doing a number of other things while I was there.
But you were staying at the house of
Yes.
a convicted sex offender.
It was a convenient place to stay.
Jeffrey Epstein's
convenient,
residence was in central Manhattan. There were over 50 luxury hotels within a 1-mile radius, and it's not as if Andrew was strapped for cash.
I've gone through this in my mind so many times. At the end of the day, with the benefit of all the hindsight that one could have, it was definitely the wrong thing to do. But at the time, I felt it was the honourable and right thing to do.
Even if his story
right
was
thing.
genuine, he has once again confirmed that he still held a convicted child rapist in high regard, someone clearly too respectful and dignified to just be cut off without a formal 4-day meeting at his mansion.
And I admit fully that my judgment was probably coloured by my tendency to be too honourable, but that's just the way it is.
Yes, the struggles of being too honorable. If only it weren't for his abundance of honor, God forbid he could have done something like donate to a child sex abuse charity or bring public awareness to a similar cause. But no, he was far too honorable, so he made the honorable choice to take a secret 4-day vacation in a pedophile's mansion.
Because during that time, those few days, witnesses say they saw many young girls coming and going at the time. There is video footage of Epstein accompanied by young girls. And you were there staying in his house, catching up with friends.
If they were, then I wasn't a party to any of that. I never saw them. I mean, you have to understand that his house, I described it more as almost as a railway station, if you know what I mean, in the sense that there were people coming in and out of that house all the time. What they were doing and why they were there, I had nothing to do with. So I'm afraid I can't make any comment on that because I really don't know.
Another guest was John Brockman, the literary agent.
It was at this moment he fucked up.
Now, he described seeing you there getting a foot massage from a young Russian woman. Did that happen?
No.
No, really?
You're absolutely sure or you can't remember?
He's throwing him under the bus.
So John Brockman's statement is false?
Well, I don't know Mr. Brockman, so I don't know what he's talking about.
But that definitely wasn't you getting a foot massage from a Russian girl in Jeffrey Epstein's house?
No.
Okay.
It might seem a funny way to break off a friendship, a 4-day house party of sorts with a dinner. It's an odd way to break up a friendship. It's a difficult way of putting it. That's a very
stark way of putting it. Yes, you're absolutely right. But actually, the truth of it is that I actually only saw him for about the dinner party, the walk in the park, and probably passing in the passage.
You would be hard-pressed to find a more guilty-looking face in the history of investigative journalism. If this was a soap opera, the director would probably tell the actor to tone it down a little bit, to at least give the viewer a shred of doubt that he's not completely full of shit.
So let's go to that Central Park walk, which was snapped. Friends of yours suggest that Epstein wanted that photo taken. Perhaps he'd even set it up.
Notice the oncoming sigh of relief as the subject matter switches from the suspicion directed at him to the suspicion directed at Epstein. He seems to relax as he can finally be genuine and speak the truth for a moment, and notice the complete switch in his demeanor and body motions.
Do you worry that you were being played?
Esprit.
Again, new information is coming out since his suicide has made us reappraise that walk in the park.
He rambles on for as long as possible to keep the subject matter pointing away from himself, but the journalist doesn't take long to put him back on the spot.
July of this year, Epstein was arrested on charges of sex trafficking and abusing dozens of underage girls. One of Epstein's accusers, Virginia Roberts, has made allegations against you. She says she met you in 2001. She says she dined with you, danced with you at Tramp nightclub in London. She went on to have sex with you in a house in Belgravia belonging to Ghislaine Maxwell, your friend. Your response?
I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady.
Wow.
None whatsoever.
You don't remember
Dismissing.
meeting her?
No.
Do you remember dancing at Tramp?
No. That
Not
couldn't
even
be,
dancing.
because the date that is being suggested, I was at home with the children.
Oh,
You
see,
know that you
remembering
were
specific
at
detail.
home with the children. Was it a memorable night?
This was a brilliant question from the journalist, and similar to what a criminal investigator would ask during a police interrogation, although it would be posed in one word: why? By asking the question in this manner, she has given Andrew the awareness that the night had to be memorable in order to be remembered. It seems obvious once stated, but this can be easily overlooked in a pressurized situation, and she has now virtually instructed him in how to respond correctly.
On that particular day that we now understand that is the date, which is the 10th of March, I was at home. I was with the children. I'd taken Beatrice to a Pizza Express in Woking for a
It was a
party,
memorable night.
I suppose sort of 4 or 5 in the afternoon.
Why would you remember that so specifically? Why would you remember a Pizza Express birthday and being at home?
Because going to Pizza Express in Woking is an unusual thing for me to do. A very unusual thing for me to do. I've only been through Woking a couple of times.
Sure.
And I remember it weirdly distinctly. As soon as somebody reminded me of it, I went, oh yes, I remember that.
This has neither been refuted nor confirmed, but nevertheless, a child's birthday party at a pizza restaurant doesn't last throughout the night. So he could have had sex with a victim after it occurred. Or this could have simply been an occasion that happened close enough to the date in question, which is the reason he is now using it as an alibi.
Is it possible that you met Virginia Roberts, dined with her, danced with her in Tramp, had sex with her on another date?
No.
Is there any way you could have had sex with that young woman or any young woman trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein in any of his residences?
No. And
Denying it. Or
without putting too fine a point on it, if you're a man, it is a positive act to have sex with somebody. You have to take some sort of positive action. And so therefore, if you try to forget, it's very difficult to try and forget positive action. And I do not remember anything.
Epstein's housekeeper, also in a Florida court legal deposition, said that you visited the Palm Beach residence around 4 times a year.
Notice Andrew's reaction in the next moments when he genuinely thinks a statement is untrue.
You got a daily massage.
4 times a year?
Now let's compare this to a question he was asked a moment earlier.
Is it possible that you met Virginia Roberts, dined with her, danced with her in Tramp, had sex with her? I'm just wondering, when you look back now, is there a chance that those massages might have been the services of someone who was being sexually exploited or trafficked by Epstein?
No,
ဟုတ်တယ်ရှင်တော့
I don't think. I mean, no, definitely not. Definitely not. And I definitely did not visit his Palm Beach house 3 or 4 times a year. Absolutely not.
Virginia Roberts' legal team says you could not spend time around Epstein and not know what was going on. You could not spend time around Epstein and not know what was going on.
Once again, put yourself in his position, but you are completely innocent. You spent time with Epstein, and you saw nothing suspicious whatsoever. You would know his statement is false, and would most likely respond in a forceful manner to refute it. You wouldn't feel the need to give a lengthy and defensive explanation to try and demonstrate your innocence.
If you are somebody like me, then people behave in a subtly different way. You wouldn't. First of all, I'm not looking for it. That's the thing. If you're looking for it, then you might have suspected now, with the benefit of a huge amount of hindsight and a huge amount of analysis, you look back and you go, well, was that really the way that it was? Or was I looking at it the wrong way?
Possible.
You don't go into these places, you don't go to stay with people looking for that.
You could not spend time around him. That was what they said. You could not spend time around him and not know.
Yes, you could, because I was there, would be a common response of a genuine person.
Look, the other aspect of this is that I live in an institution at Buckingham Palace which has members of staff walking around all the time. And I don't wish to appear grand, but there were a lot of people who were walking around Jeffrey Epstein's house. As far as I was aware, they were staff, they were people that were working for him or doing things. As it were, I interacted with them, if you want to say good morning, good afternoon, but I didn't, if you see what I mean, interact with them in a way that was, what are you doing here? Why are you here? What's going on?
But you'd notice if there were hundreds of underage girls in Buckingham Palace.
God.
We are once again about to see a truthful response, far more animated and forceful.
Wouldn't you?
But you would notice there were hundreds of underage girls in Jeffrey's house. Wasn't there?
The number from the reporter was clearly exaggerated. No one ever claimed there were hundreds of sex slaves walking around Epstein's premises.
Epstein is dead.
Yes.
The women are now being heard.
Quite rightly.
You've talked about a thick skin. I wonder if you have any sense now of guilt, regret or shame about any of your behaviour and your friendship with Epstein.
Do I regret the fact that he has quite obviously conducted himself in a manner unbecoming? Yes.
Unbecoming? He was a sex offender.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm being polite, in the sense that he was a sex offender. But no. Was I right in having him as a friend at the time? Bearing in mind this was some years before he was accused of being a sex offender. I don't think there was anything wrong then. The problem was the fact that once he had been convicted,
you stayed with him.
I stayed with him, and that's the bit that as it were, I kick myself for on a daily basis, because it was not something that was becoming of a member of the royal family. And we try and uphold the highest standards and practices, and I let the side down. Simple as that.
This interview has been exceptionally rare. You might not speak on this subject again. Is there anything you feel has been left unsaid that you would like to say now?
No, I don't think so.
No answer.
This
Okay.
was the perfect moment to express sympathy for Epstein's victims, yet he was too self-involved and focused on self-preservation to even realize it. This interview had been an attempt to salvage his reputation, yet backfired in a manner that his legal advisors most certainly would not have anticipated.
Isn't it accused of something? It's a very sus. Betul dia pernah sus betul.